The morning my wife died, I was 40 feet away. The morning my wife Maggie died, I was 40 feet away. She was in the kitchen. I was in the garage by the time I heard the sound and came through the door. It was already too late. The doctors said cardiac arrest. I believed them because she had a heart condition, because she was 71, because I was a retired detective who had spent 31 years reading crime scenes and somehow could not read the one happening in his own kitchen. It wasn't until the night after her funeral, when I found her note in the sewing basket and our anniversary watch in the locked drawer and the USB drive taped to the back of it, that I understood. Maggie hadn't just died. Maggie had been murdered, and the last 4 months of her life, she had spent every quiet morning building the case that would prove it. She built it alone, in silence, while making my coffee at 6 a.m., while folding my shirts, while sitting across from me at the kitchen table, and never once letting me see her hands shake. She left everything for me to find. She knew I would find it. She knew me better than I knew myself. And what I heard on that USB drive, my son Derek's voice, my daughter-in-law Claudia's name, the word clean used about the woman we had just buried together, changed everything I thought I understood about my family, my marriage, and the 31 years I had told myself I was paying attention. My name is Arthur James Mercer. I am 74 years old, and this is the story of how my wife saved me from the grave after she was already in hers. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Before we begin, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe. It helps more people find stories like this one. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from tonight. And one quick note. While this story draws from real human experiences, certain names, locations, and details have been changed or dramatized for storytelling purposes. The emotions are real. The lessons are real. Let's begin. The house still smelled like her. That was the first thing I noticed when the last of the funeral guests left and the door closed behind them, and the silence came in the way silence does when it has been waiting outside for hours and finally gets permission to enter. Cedar. And something faintly floral. Not perfume exactly. More like the accumulated presence of a person who had moved through these rooms for 31 years and left herself in the walls and the curtains and the particular grain of the kitchen table. I stood in the hallway for a moment. Just stood there. 74 years old, 31 years a detective, and I had no idea what to do with my hands. The living room was still arranged for receiving, chairs pulled from their usual positions, extra seats borrowed from the dining room, a folding table near the window that Mrs. Holden from next door had brought over with a casserole dish, and a gentleness that I had not been able to respond to properly. I would need to return the table. I couldn't think about that yet. I went to Maggie's armchair. I didn't sit in it. I stood beside it with one hand on the back, the way you stand beside something that belongs to someone else, even when that person is gone. The fabric was worn at the armrests in the specific pattern of her elbows. She had owned this chair for 19 years. She had read approximately 400 books in it, by my rough count, and he had fallen asleep in it on Sunday afternoons more times than either of us had ever tracked. The room still held the shape of all those Sundays. I went to the kitchen, so the bourbon someone had left on the counter was untouched. I poured 2 fingers into a glass and held it without drinking it, and looked out the back window at the garden, the empty south wall, the oak tree at the far corner, the particular quality of late afternoon light that made everything look like it was being remembered, rather than seen. Derek had been strange at the service. I had noticed it the way I noticed things I didn't want to notice, peripherally, without full acknowledgement. The way you see something at the edge of your vision and tell yourself it's nothing, because looking directly at it requires a response you're not ready to give. He had stood with Claudia through most of the reception. He had accepted condolences with the appropriate expressions, but his eyes had moved through the room with a quality I recognized from 31 years of reading people in difficult situations. Not grief, not shock, but the specific attentiveness of a person cataloging rather than mourning. Claudia had moved differently. She had spent 20 minutes near the bookshelf in the study. She had opened the hall closet twice, both times briefly, both times when no one appeared to be looking. Both times I had been looking. I told myself I was being uncharitable. I told myself grief made everyone strange. I finished the bourbon without tasting it and set the glass in the sink. I was going to go upstairs, change out of the funeral clothes, sit somewhere and try to locate the shape of what the next hours were supposed to look like. That was the plan. Then I saw the sewing basket. It was on the kitchen table, not where Maggie kept it. She kept it in the cabinet beside the television, where it had lived for 22 years. Someone had moved it to the kitchen table, or Maggie had moved it before she died. I lifted the lid. Thimbles, thread in a dozen colors, a small pair of scissors with orange handles, a measuring tape coiled in the corner, and beneath all of it, folded once, a piece of paper in Maggie's handwriting. Art, the watch, the drawer, only you. I stood in the kitchen holding that note for a long time. The house was completely quiet. Outside, the Memphis evening was beginning its slow negotiation between day and dark. The bourbon glass was in the sink. The folding table needed to be returned to Mrs. Holden. I put the note in my shirt pocket. I went to the locked drawer. The drawer had been locked since 1998. I had installed the lock myself on a Saturday afternoon in October of that year, using a kit from the hardware store on Summer Avenue and a level of focus that Maggie had found disproportionate to the task. She had stood in the doorway watching me work and said, "Art, it's a drawer, not a vault." And I had said, "A drawer with a lock is a vault." And she had laughed in the particular way she laughed at things I said that were both true and slightly absurd. The key lived on a chain around my neck, alongside my house key. A second copy was in a small plastic bag, in the envelope the funeral home had returned to me that morning. The personal effects from her pockets when she was brought in. Her reading glasses, a receipt from the pharmacy, the spare key. She had been carrying the spare key when she died. I understood that now. I opened the drawer. Inside, in the order she had always kept it, the deed to the house in a manila envelope, our marriage certificate in a plastic sleeve, the small wooden box that held her mother's ring, a photograph of the two of us at Niagara Falls in 1994 that we had always meant to frame and never had, and on a square of blue velvet at the back of the drawer. Our anniversary watch, gold case, white face, Roman numerals. I had given it to her on June 14th, 1993, our first anniversary, when we were still in the apartment on Madison Avenue, and I was making $31,000 a year and had saved for 4 months to afford it. She had worn it for 31 years. I had seen it on her wrist so many times that I had stopped seeing it. The way you stop seeing things that have always been there. I picked it up. On the back, secured with a small piece of clear tape, was a USB drive. Black. Smaller than my thumbnail. I stood at the drawer for a moment, the weight of the watch in my hand, the weight of what I was about to do. Then I went to the kitchen counter where I kept the old laptop I used for bills and email. I opened it. I plugged in the drive. One folder, 12 audio files. No labels, just numbers. I opened file 1, Maggie's voice. Not calm, careful. The The specific quality of a person who is frightened and has decided that the fear is not going to be in charge of what they say. If you're hearing this, baby, I didn't make it in time. I need you to listen to all 12 files before you do anything. All of them, in order. Promise me. I sat down. I opened file 2. A different voice. A voice I had heard every day for 42 years. At breakfast tables and birthday dinners and arguments about nothing. And the particular sound of a grown man pretending to be fine when he wasn't. Derek. He was talking to someone I couldn't identify. His voice had the low, clipped quality of a man who had made a decision and was now managing the logistics of it. The switch needs to happen before the end of the month. Keep it clean. If it looks like anything other than what it is, the whole thing falls apart. I stopped the file. I sat in the kitchen, in the house that smelled like cedar and the absence of my wife, with the anniversary watch in my hand and a USB drive in my laptop. And I listened to the silence for a long time. I closed the laptop at 11:15. Not because I had finished, because I needed to stop and breathe before the next file. And I had learned long ago, from 31 years of sitting with evidence that changed what you thought you knew, that there was a point at which continuing without pause became a liability rather than a discipline. You started missing things. You started filling gaps with what you expected rather than what was there. I went to the bathroom. I ran cold water over my hands. I looked at myself in the mirror above the sink. The small fixture light that Maggie had chosen because she said the overhead made everyone look like a suspect, and I looked like a man who had just found out his wife had been murdered. I looked like a man who had been 40 feet away. I stood at that mirror for a long time. The lines in my face, the white at my temples, the eyes that had looked back at me from mirrors for 74 years, in 100 different rooms, after 100 different kinds of difficult news. None of those rooms had been this room. None of that news had been this news. I thought about April, 3 months before Maggie died. She had been quieter than usual, not sad, not distant, just quieter, as if she was conserving something. I had attributed it to her health, to the medication changes her cardiologist had been managing, to the particular fatigue of a woman in her 70s who had been running a household and a life for longer than she had been resting. I had not asked enough questions. I was a detective for 31 years, and I had not asked my own wife enough questions. I thought about the new watch Derek had given her in April. An Omega, expensive, more than Derek could reasonably afford, presented at Sunday dinner with the kind of deliberate generosity that I now understood was not generosity at all. Maggie had thanked him. She had worn it once, and then put it in the drawer and gone back to the anniversary watch without explanation. I had noticed, I had said nothing, because Maggie's preferences were her own, and I had learned over 31 years to respect the things she chose not to explain. She hadn't been choosing not to explain. She had been keeping evidence intact. I went to the garage. I sat on the stool beside the workbench, the one I had sat on for 30 years when I needed to think through something that the house itself was too close to. The garage smelled like motor oil and dried lavender from a sachet Maggie had hung on the tool rack in 2019. She had said the oil smell gave her a headache. I had said lavender in a garage was undignified. She had put it there anyway, and I had never once taken it down. I sat with the motor oil and the lavender, and the beginning of understanding. Then I went back inside and opened File 4. File 4 was a photograph, grainy, pulled from security camera footage, the image slightly overexposed in the upper right corner where a parking lot light was bleeding into the frame. A woman in a dark coat, her face partially turned, standing outside a building I didn't immediately recognize. A man in a white coat beside her, heavy set, his back mostly to the camera. The timestamp in the corner read, 11 weeks ago. I looked at the woman's posture, the angle of her shoulders, the way her left hand was positioned slightly behind her, the index finger extended in the unconscious gesture of a person making a point they believe is already decided. Claudia, file 5 was a second photograph. Same camera, same location. 4 minutes later. Claudia handing the man an envelope, his hand accepting it without hesitation, the way you accept something you have been expecting. File 6 was a partial sign, captured in the background, white lettering on a dark surface, partially obscured, enough to read MED4, and below it, a suite number. I knew that strip mall. I had walked past it 100 times. The clinic with the MED4 designation had been on Lamar Avenue until 18 months ago, when it lost its state certification and closed without announcement. I searched the address on my laptop. The clinic had operated under the license of a doctor, Raymond Whitmore, general practitioner, certified 2001, certification revoked 2021 following a state board investigation into improper prescription practices. Current status, license inactive. Last known address, a physical therapy office on Winchester Avenue. I sat at the kitchen table and thought about a case I had worked in 2004. A man named Curtis Holloway, 63 years old, retired school teacher. His heart medication had been swapped, same capsule, same color coding, different compound. He had died of a cardiac event that his family had initially accepted as consistent with his condition. I had built that case from the outside in. I had never expected to need to build one from the inside out. My phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. I answered it, Mr. Mercer, a woman's voice. Older, precise. The kind of voice that had spent decades in professional settings and retained the cadence even in private. My name is Dr. Eleanor Harlow. I was Margaret's employer for 11 years. I think you need to hear what I know. And I think tonight is the right time. I stood up from the kitchen table. How did you get this number? I said. Margaret gave it to me, she said. 4 months ago. She said if anything happened to her before she finished what she was doing, I should call you the night of the funeral. She was very specific about the timing. I looked at the laptop, the USB drive still in the port, files 7 through 12 still unopened. What do you know? I said. More than I can tell you on the phone, she said. I have someone here who has been working on this for 4 months. He knew your wife through her work with me. He can show you what he has. A pause. Mr. Mercer, the people who did this are already moving. They moved today, at the reception. I need you to come tonight. Where? She gave me an address on the east side of the city. Come alone, she said. Tell no one you're going. I ended the call. I stood in the kitchen for 30 seconds, feeling the weight of what had already happened and the weight of what was still coming, both of them pressing down at once. Then I went upstairs, changed out of the funeral clothes into dark slacks and a gray shirt, and the old detective jacket I had kept in the back of the closet for 6 years. Put the USB drive on the chain around my neck beside the house key, and picked up my car keys from the hook by the door. I paused at the kitchen table. I put my hand flat on the surface. On the wood, on the particular spot where Maggie's coffee cup had left a ring over 31 years of mornings, a small imperfection in the grain that I had looked at every day for 3 decades and never once thought to remove. I'm going to find out, I said quietly. All of it. I promise. I went out into the Memphis night. The address was 19 minutes east on Poplar Avenue. I counted the minutes, not the miles. A sergeant named Beaumont had taught me that in my 3rd year on the force. Distance could fool you. Time never lied. The estate was set back from the road, behind a stone wall and a row of oak trees that had been there long enough to develop opinions about the traffic. A service entrance on the left, exactly as she had said. A wrought iron gate, open. A gravel path lit by low ground lights designed to be useful without being conspicuous. A man was waiting at the end of the path. He was about my age, early 70s, compact, with the particular stillness of someone who had learned patience the hard way and decided to keep it. He was wearing a dark jacket and holding a small flashlight he didn't need because the path was lit, which told me he had been waiting long enough to have considered needing it. I recognized him before he spoke. Frank Dolan, 11 years my partner at Memphis PD. Retired 3 years ago, 6 months after I did. We had stayed in contact the way former partners do. The occasional call. The assumption that the other one was fine unless you heard otherwise. Frank, I said. Art? He put the flashlight in his pocket. I'm sorry about Maggie. How long have you known? I said. He held my eyes for a moment. Long enough that I'm ashamed I didn't come sooner. I accepted that. I didn't forgive it yet. Take me inside, I said. The library was on the second floor. A room that smelled like old paper and the specific quality of wealth that is old enough to have stopped performing itself. Bookshelves floor to ceiling. A desk with a lamp casting a warm circle over everything. 2 chairs arranged facing each other across a low table. In one of the chairs, a woman in her mid-80s, white hair, sharp eyes, the kind of posture that had been maintained for so long it had become structural. A wheelchair beside the chair, which told me she had made the effort to sit upright for this meeting. Dr. Eleanor Harlow. She looked at me the way people look at you when they have been thinking about meeting you for a long time, and are now calibrating the reality against the expectations. Thank you for coming, she said. Tell me what you know, I said. She looked at Frank. Frank opened a folder on the low table between us. 4 months ago, he said, Maggie came to Dr. Harlow with a concern. She had seen something she couldn't explain and needed someone she trusted to help her understand it. She saw Claudia, I said. At the strip mall on Lamar. Oh, Frank looked up. You have the photographs, files 2 through 6 on the USB. Frank and Eleanor exchanged a look that told me Maggie had not told them about the USB, which meant Maggie had been running parallel tracks. What she shared with them. And what she left for me. She had been thorough in a way that still had not fully revealed its dimensions. There's more, Frank said. He reached into the folder. Frank laid the first photograph on the table. September. Claudia at the strip mall. First visit to Whitmore's clinic. A camera from a dry cleaner across the street. Better angle than the USB files. Claudia's face fully visible, mid-stride. The leather portfolio she always carried under her left arm. Second visit. October. Claudia with an envelope. Cash. Third visit. November. Delivery and payment. $4,000. A pharmacy bag. Maggie started showing symptoms in January, I said. Yes, Frank said. She was taking the medication from her organizer starting in January. Yes, I looked at Frank, and she knew. She suspected in December, he said. She confirmed in January. She had been comparing pills, the ones in her organizer against the ones from the original prescription, which she had been keeping separate. He reached into the folder again. She photographed them side by side. The images are on your USB, files 9 and 10. Files 9 and 10. I had stopped at file 6. She sent the comparison photographs to a contact at Vanderbilt Medical. Eleanor said, a retired pharmacologist I knew through professional channels. He ran an informal analysis. His findings are in file 11. High-dose anticoagulant. delivered in a standard blood pressure capsule casing, identical in appearance to her regular medication. She knew what they had done, I said, and she said nothing. The room was quiet. She knew what they had done, I said again. And she kept taking the pills, because if she stopped, they would know she knew. Eleanor looked at me with something that was not pity, something closer to recognition. Yes, she said. That is what we believe. I stood up. I needed to move. I needed the physical discipline of forward motion to keep the thing that was rising in my chest from becoming something I couldn't manage. Arthur, Eleanor said. I stopped. Sit down, she said quietly. There is more you need to hear. I sat down. Frank set a final photograph on the table, a still frame from a security camera, grainy, time-stamped. A white exterior wall, a parking lot light throwing yellow over the asphalt, a figure walking toward a dark vehicle. The timestamp read, 3:22 a.m., 14 days before Maggie's cardiac arrest. The figure was tall, broad-shouldered, walking with his left hand slightly raised, the way he always did when he was thinking through a problem. I recognized the walk before I recognized the face. That's Derek, I said, outside the clinic on Whitmore's service entrance. Frank confirmed. Camera belongs to the dry cleaner 2 doors down. The clinic's own footage for that night is unavailable. Hard drive reported corrupted. 14 days out. Maggie had had 2 more weeks of mornings. 2 more weeks of coffee and lavender and her hand touching mine across the table. And my son had been outside a back alley clinic at 3 in the morning. Already committed to what he was going to do, I set the photograph back on the table. I didn't trust myself to keep holding it. Eleanor spoke carefully. The way people speak when they know the next sentence will change a room permanently. There's one more thing. Arthur, Frank found it 3 days ago. I asked him to wait until I could be here when you saw it. Frank removed a single sheet of paper inside a clear plastic sleeve and slid it across the table. It was a handwritten list, Maggie's handwriting. I knew it the way I knew my own reflection. Neat, evenly spaced. Each letter formed with the deliberate care of a woman who had been a legal secretary for 19 years. The list contained 4 items. 1. The watch. 2. Files 1 through 12. 3. The blue envelope, bottom left corner of the lining in my winter coat. 4. Tell Art I wasn't afraid. I stared at line 4 for a long time. Frank didn't say anything. Eleanor didn't say anything. The grandfather clock in the corner counted 8 slow seconds. And I did not look away from those 6 words. Tell Art I wasn't afraid. There's a blue envelope in her winter coat, I said. So, we didn't retrieve it, Frank said. We didn't go into your house. That was hers to leave for you. I nodded slowly. The winter coat, hanging in the hall closet, second hook from the left, where Maggie had put it in March when the weather started warming. Charcoal gray wool. She had bought it the winter we went to Chicago for our 25th anniversary. She had worn it the day we buried his mother. She had put an envelope inside that coat. She had written a list. She had left a USB and a watch and a note in a sewing basket, and a 4-point plan for a dead woman to reach back through her own ending, and hand her husband a map. How long have you known? I asked Frank, and long enough that I'm ashamed I didn't come sooner, he said again. I accepted that. I didn't forgive it yet, but I accepted it. All right, I said. I stood up. My legs held this time. I need to go home. The drive back took 19 minutes. I counted them. Not the miles. Every red light felt like a judgment. Every green one felt like a dare. I parked in the driveway, not the garage. Maggie had always said the garage was safer, that Memphis nights had a way of reaching into unlocked cars. But tonight, I needed to move fast, and the garage door groaned when it opened. And old habits died hard, when you were trying not to wake ghosts. The house was exactly as I'd left it. That still surprised me. I kept expecting the rooms to rearrange themselves, to find the furniture shifted. The air changed. Something physically different in a space that had lost its center. But the living room was the same. The kitchen was the same. Maggie's reading glasses were still on the side table next to her chair, folded neatly over a paperback she'd been 60 pages from finishing. I didn't look at them long. I went straight to the hall closet. Second hook from the left. The charcoal gray wool coat was there, exactly where she'd left it in March. I lifted it off the hook with both hands, the way you lift something fragile. It still smelled faintly of her. That specific combination of cedar and a perfume she'd worn for 20 years called Soir de Lune, a name she had liked because it sounded like the kind of thing the moon would smell like if you could get close enough to find out. I laid the coat across the hallway bench and ran my fingers along the interior lining. Bottom left corner. My fingers found it immediately. A slight stiffness in the silk. A small rectangular shape that didn't belong to the coat's construction. Maggie had sewn it in. Not pinned, not tucked. Sewn with small, careful stitches along 3 sides, leaving one edge open like a pocket within a pocket. She had done this with a needle and thread, while her pill organizer held a compound that was killing her, and she had not let a single stitch go crooked. I reached in and pulled out the blue envelope. It was the color of the sky at 5 in the morning, that particular pale blue that exists for about 15 minutes before the light hardens into day. The envelope was sealed. His name was written on the front in Maggie's hand. Not Art, not Honey, not even Arthur. Just his full name, the way she only ever wrote it on important documents and birthday cards she wanted him to keep. Arthur James Mercer. I carried it to the kitchen table. I sat down. I placed it in front of me and looked at it for a long moment without opening it. Then I thought about what she'd written on the list. Tell Art I wasn't afraid. I opened the envelope. There were 3 things inside. The first was a folded letter, 2 pages, written front and back in Maggie's neat hand. I set it aside without reading it. Not yet. I needed to know what else was there first. The second was a small index card with a name, an address, a phone number. Dr. Raymond Whitmore, certified as revoked. See State Board file number TN-2021-0847. Below the address, in red ink, he knows what Claudia asked him to make. I looked at that line for a long time. The third item was a photograph. Derek and Claudia sitting across a table from a heavy-set man in a white coat, the same man from the USB footage. But this photograph was clearer, direct angle, good light. You could see Derek's face. You could see Claudia's hand resting on a manila envelope between them. You could see the man in the white coat nodding. At the bottom of the photograph, in Maggie's handwriting, October 14th, 3 months before I got sick. 3 months of planning, 3 months of meetings and envelopes and nodding men in white coats. 3 months while Maggie made my coffee and ironed my shirts and asked me how I was sleeping. I thought about becoming invisible. It was something I had done twice in 31 years on the force. Gone completely off-grid during a case when the subjects were dangerous enough that visibility became a liability. You became a background detail in someone else's day, and you watched, and you waited. And when the moment came, you were already in position, before they knew you were there. I was going to have to do it again. I folded the photograph carefully. I placed it back in the blue envelope with the index card. I picked up Maggie's 2-page letter and finally began to read. Maggie wrote the way she talked, not in long, complicated sentences that folded back on themselves, not in the careful, formal language she used at work. She wrote the way she talked at the kitchen table on Sunday mornings, when the coffee was strong and the light came through the east window at that particular angle that made everything look like it had been painted rather than built. She wrote like she was sitting across from me. Art, I don't know when you'll find this. I don't know if you'll find it at all. But I need to believe you will. Because if you don't, then everything I've been doing these past 3 months was just an old woman talking to herself. And I refuse to believe that. I want to start with the most important thing, so you hear it before anything else. I made a choice. Nobody forced me into silence. I knew what was happening, and I chose how to respond to it. And I need you to understand that before you blame yourself for not seeing it sooner, you didn't see it because I made sure you didn't. I was always better at keeping secrets than you were. I stopped reading. I sat very still at the kitchen table, outside. A car moved slowly down Creston Avenue, its headlights sweeping briefly across the kitchen wall and then gone. I started again. Derek came to me in October. Not to confess, I don't want you to think he felt guilty enough for that. He came to ask me to change the will. He said it calmly, the way he asks for things when he's already decided he's going to have them. He said you were getting older, and that a power of attorney arrangement would protect the family. He used the word logical 4 times in 10 minutes. I told him I would think about it. I didn't tell him I already knew about Claudia and the man in the white coat. I had seen them 3 weeks earlier. I was coming out of Kroger on Poplar, and I saw her car parked at that strip mall near the check cashing place. I almost didn't stop, but I did. I sat in my car, and I watched. And I took 3 photographs on my phone before they went inside. I didn't tell you because I didn't have enough yet, and because I was afraid of what you would do before I had enough. I recognized that, precisely. The particular discipline of a woman who had watched me work cases for 30 years, and understood that evidence gathered in anger was evidence that fell apart in court. She had been thinking like my partner, not my wife. I didn't know whether to love her more for that, or grieve harder. The medication started in January. I know because I started keeping a separate set of pills, the ones from the original prescription, in the lining of the coat. I compared them to what was in my pill organizer every week. By February, the organizer pills were a different shade. I photographed them side by side. Those photographs are on the USB. Files 9 and 10. Dr. Harlow helped me understand what I was looking at. The results are in file 11. I want to be clear about something. Art. I am not telling you this so you will hurt Derek. I am telling you this so you will outlive it. So the last thing people say about Arthur James Mercer will not be that he destroyed himself over what his son did. Do what you do, but come back from it. That's all I'm asking. I folded the letter at the halfway point. I needed a moment. I walked to the bathroom. I stood in front of the mirror in the small fixture light, 74 years old. White at the temples, white in the stubble along my jaw. The same face I had been carrying since 1950, just reconfigured by decades into something more angular, more settled. I opened the cabinet beside the mirror, behind the aspirin and the allergy medication, on the back shelf. I kept an old leather holster, unloaded, stored out of habit, a remnant of 31 years on the force. I took it down. I held it in both hands, the way you hold something that represents a version of yourself you'd hoped to leave behind. I put it on the shelf beside the sink, not on my body, just within reach. There was a difference, and it mattered. I went back to the kitchen and picked up Maggie's letter. Well, page 2. There's a woman named Lily. You haven't met her yet, but you will. She's Derek's daughter from before Claudia. He doesn't know I know about her, but I do. She's 26. She lives on Beale Street. She works mornings at a coffee shop called The Anchor. She has your eyes. Art, I don't know what to do with that. But I thought you should know. I read that paragraph 3 times. A granddaughter, 26 years old, working mornings on Beale Street, 2 miles from where I was sitting. Maggie had known. I set the letter down on the table. I pressed both palms flat against the wood and breathed. The kitchen clock read 11:47 p.m. Through the window, the Memphis night was quiet. That particular late-night quiet of a city that has decided to rest, but hasn't quite managed it yet. I thought about Lily. I thought about Maggie writing, "She has your eyes," in careful red ink in a blue envelope in the lining of a coat, 3 months before she died. Then I picked the letter back up and finished reading. They came at 9 in the morning. I had been awake since 4, 90 minutes of sleep on the living room couch. The blue envelope on the coffee table in front of me. The USB drive back around my neck on the same chain as my house key. When I heard the car in the driveway, I was already dressed. I heard Claudia's heels on the front porch before the knock. I opened the door before she could use her key. Claudia smiled the way she always smiled at me, with her mouth, precisely, and nothing else. She was wearing a black dress that was appropriate for the day after a funeral and slightly too fitted to be purely about mourning. She was carrying a leather portfolio under one arm, the kind that closed with a brass clasp and looked like it belonged in a boardroom. Derek was behind her. He met my eyes for exactly 1 second before looking past me into the house. "Dad," he said, "we wanted to check on you." "I'm fine," I said. I stepped back from the door. Not because I wanted to let them in, because I needed them inside where I could watch them. Claudia moved through the living room the way she always moved through it, assessing. Her eyes tracked across surfaces. She noted positions of objects. There was a slight pause she made near anything that might contain documents or valuables. I had noticed it for years without naming it. She sat down in Maggie's armchair. I stood in the doorway between the living room and the kitchen and watched her do it. Claudia crossed her legs, set the leather portfolio on her knee, and opened the brass clasp with the practiced ease of a woman who had rehearsed this visit several times. Derek sat on the couch. "We wanted to talk about a few things," Claudia said. "Practical things." She placed a power of attorney form on the coffee table. Pre-filled. My name in the designated fields. A signature line at the bottom. A pen placed beside it without ceremony. The date of Maggie's death listed as the effective start date, which meant someone had prepared this before the funeral, possibly before the burial. I looked at the form. I did not touch it. "Maggie handled the finances," I said. "Maggie is gone," Claudia said. Not unkindly. Precisely. I nodded slowly. I let a silence sit in the room for 4 full seconds. An old interrogation technique. The kind that made people fill the space with something they hadn't planned to say. Derek filled it. "It's just a formality, Dad. It doesn't change anything. It just means we can help with bills, with the house, with the investments," Claudia added, smoothly. Derek stopped. Art looked at his son. Derek was looking at the coffee table. Claudia kept going. A property assessment form. Then a financial summary on letterhead from a firm I didn't recognize, showing account balances that were close but not exact. Not Maggie's actual numbers. Close enough to be convincing if you weren't looking carefully. I had been looking carefully for 31 years. "Where did these figures come from?" I asked. "We had an advisor run an estimate," Claudia said. "I'll need to have my lawyer look at these," I said. Something moved across Claudia's face. A tightening, a small recalibration. That was when I heard the sound from the hallway. A small sound. The particular creak of the 3rd floorboard from the top of the stairs. The one Maggie had always meant to fix and never gotten around to. The one I had learned to step over for 31 years out of habit. I looked toward the hallway. Claudia looked toward the hallway. Derek did not look toward the hallway. I filed that away. I need some water, I said. Excuse me. I walked to the kitchen. I filled a glass. I stood at the counter for 15 seconds, long enough to confirm that the sound did not repeat, long enough to understand that someone else was in my house. I went back to the living room. I sat down in my chair. Claudia was watching me with the focused patience of a woman who was certain of the outcome and willing to wait for it. I'll think about it, I said. I picked up the power of attorney form. I held it the way I used to hold evidence at a scene, reading it with the particular attention of a man who understood that documents lied in the details, not in the headlines. The date of Maggie's death listed as the effective start date. Someone had prepared this before the funeral. Who drew this up? I asked. Our attorney, Claudia said. Patterson. Lawrence Patterson. He's on Germantown Parkway. I nodded. I would check that name. Derek shifted on the couch. The movement he made when he wanted to be somewhere else and had run out of reasons to leave. Dad, he said. His voice was quieter than it had been when they arrived. We're not trying to make this harder. We just want to make sure you're taken care of. I know, I said. I said it the way you say something that is technically true and completely incomplete at the same time. Derek heard the incompleteness. Claudia did not. She was already moving to her next point. A fourth document, an estate liquidity assessment, showing account balances that were close but not exact. They had done their research. What they didn't know was that Maggie had opened a separate trust 18 months ago. What they didn't know was that Solomon Gold, who had been our attorney for 22 years, held the documents. I had not mentioned Solomon Gold. I was not going to mention Solomon Gold. The creak came again from upstairs. This time 2 sounds. The third floorboard, and then the second. Someone moving away from the top of the stairs. I should check on something, I said. I went up the stairs at the pace of a man my age taking stairs, steady and deliberate. At the top of the landing, I turned right toward the guest room. The door was partially open. I pushed it the rest of the way. A young woman was standing at the window, maybe 25 or 26. Slender, wearing jeans and a dark green jacket, her hair natural and pulled back. She had her arms crossed over her chest, and she was looking out at the street with the expression of someone who had been waiting somewhere uncomfortable for longer than they'd expected. When she heard me, she turned around. I looked at her face. I understood immediately what Maggie had meant when she wrote, "She has your eyes." It wasn't just the color. Dark brown. River dark. The particular shade my own mother had called river dark in photographs from her 40s. It was the set of them. The slight downward angle at the outer corners that gave every member of the Mercer line the appearance of permanent, patient consideration. I had seen that expression in the mirror my whole life. I was seeing it now in the face of a young woman I had never met. "Mr. Mercer," she said. Her voice was steady, prepared. "Lily," I said. She blinked. Just once. "She told you about me. She left me a letter," I said. Lily looked at me for a long moment. Then she reached into the inside pocket of her green jacket and held out a small envelope. White. Smaller than the blue one. Sealed. "She left me one too," Lily said. "She said if anything happened to her, I should come here. She said you would know what to do." I took the envelope. I didn't open it. "How long have you known Derek was your father?" I asked. "Since I was 19. Lily said. "He found me. He came to where I was working. He told me to keep it between us." She looked down at the floor briefly. "I kept it for 7 years. Why are you here now?" "Because 3 weeks ago, Derek called me and asked me to come to the house today. He said he needed me to witness a document." She looked toward the hallway. "He didn't tell me what kind." "One." I walked to the door and pulled it mostly closed. Sit down, I said quietly. Don't go downstairs yet. I descended the stairs alone. Derek and Claudia were speaking in low voices when I came back into the living room. They stopped when they saw me. I picked up the power of attorney form from the coffee table. I held it in both hands for a moment, looking at the signature line at the bottom. Then I looked at Derek. Derek looked back at me. For the first time since they'd arrived, his son was fully meeting his eyes. I set the form back down on the table. I picked up the pen. I uncapped it. I wrote 4 words on the signature line. Not my name. I know what you did. I capped the pen. I set it down beside the form. I folded my hands in my lap and looked at my son. The room was completely silent. If you're still watching, please leave a 1 in the comments right now. I wrote 4 words on that paper instead of my name. And I need to know someone saw that with me. What comes after this moment in my story gets harder before it gets better. Some of the details ahead have been pieced together on recordings, documents, and conversations I've had to reconstruct. A few elements have been dramatized so you can understand them the way I eventually understood them. If that's not what you came here for, it's okay to stop. But if you're staying with me, keep watching. We're not done yet. Derek's face did not collapse. I had expected it to. Had expected the particular unraveling of a man caught. The way guilt surfaced when it had nowhere left to go. I had seen it happen hundreds of times in 31 years. But Derek just looked at the 4 words on the signature line. He looked at them for a long time without expression. Then he stood up. We should go, he said to Claudia. His voice was flat, controlled in a way that cost him something. Claudia had not moved. She was looking at the form with an expression I couldn't fully read. Not fear, not anger, something more calculated than either. Already 3 steps ahead of the moment, already working out what it meant and what to do with it. Derek, she said. We should go, he said again, firmer. Claudia closed the leather portfolio with a precise snap of the brass clasp. She stood. She smoothed her dress. She looked at me with the careful composure of a woman who had decided this was only a minor complication. We'll be in touch, she said. I said nothing. I watched them leave. I listened to Claudia's heels on the porch, the car doors, the engine starting, the vehicle backing down the driveway. I sat until the sound was completely gone. Then I picked up the power of attorney form and placed it in my breast pocket. Evidence was evidence. Frank called at 11:15. I need to show you something, he said. Security footage from the camera at the independent pharmacy on Creston. Mr. Aldridge's place. I knew it. Raymond Aldridge, 71. Had run that pharmacy since he inherited it from his father. Maggie had used him for minor prescriptions because she liked the way he wrote her name on the label, Margaret Mercer. Never abbreviated. What's on the footage? I asked. Come see it, Frank said. Some things need to be seen, not described. Frank's office was above a tax preparation service on Summer Avenue. He had the footage pulled up when I arrived at 11:40. 11 weeks ago, Frank said. Wednesday morning. 8:47 a.m. He pressed play. The camera covered the sidewalk and the door. At 8:47:31, a woman paused at the pharmacy entrance and looked back down the street. For 2 full seconds, her face was fully visible. Claudia, Frank paused the footage. She went inside. 11 minutes and 40 seconds. His inventory log for that morning shows an unusual transaction. He slid a printed sheet across the desk. An over-the-counter anticoagulant, sold in bulk. The maximum allowed without a prescription. Paid cash. Maggie started showing symptoms 10 weeks ago, I said. Yes, Frank said. 1 week between purchase and onset. There's something else, Frank said. He opened the filing cabinet and removed a clear plastic sleeve. Inside was a piece of paper. approximately 1/3 of a full sheet. The edges darkened and curled by heat. Some of the writing was legible. The handwriting was Maggie's. I could read fragments. Has been watching the house since. Derek signed something I did not. And all near the bottom. Please make sure Art knows before they. The rest was ash. Where did you find this? I asked. Storm drain on the south side of your property, Frank said. 3 days after the funeral, someone burned it and put it in the drain to keep the ash from spreading. It rained that night. That's the only reason any of it survived. Maggie had written a letter, not the one in the blue envelope, a different letter, a letter that had been burned. She was sending it to someone, I said. Frank slid a second sheet across the desk. On it, he had written a single name, circled twice in blue ink. Dr. Whitmore, I said. She knew about him before she died. The letter was burned before it was sent. Frank looked at me carefully, which means someone in that house knew she had written it. The room was very quiet. I need to talk to Whitmore, I said. I know where he is, Frank said. Frank drove. I had not argued. My hands were steady, but my mind was moving too fast for safe driving, and I had learned long ago that those two things in combination were how good detectives became statistics. I was thinking about the burned letter. Someone had found it before it was sent. That meant one of two things. Either Maggie had been watched closely enough that her correspondence was being monitored. One in the house had gone through her things while she was still alive. Both possibilities required a level of intrusion that made my jaw tighten. But the second one was worse, because it meant Maggie had known she was being watched and had still managed to build the case on the USB. She had worked around them. She had been smarter than they thought. Right up to the end, I held that thought carefully. The way you hold something that hurts and helps in equal measure. The physical therapy office was in a low strip of commercial buildings between a dollar store and a closed restaurant. Frank showed the receptionist his PI card. She made a phone call. We waited 3 minutes. A door at the back opened. A heavy-set man in a white coat appeared, and I recognized the face from Claudia's parking lot photograph immediately. Wider in person. Tired in a way the photograph hadn't captured. The kind of tired that came from living with something that wouldn't stay quiet. Dr. Raymond Whitmore looked at us both. His eyes went to my face and stayed there. Mr. Mercer, he said. He had not been given my name. You know who I am, I said. He nodded once. Come in the back. The back room was small. A desk, 2 chairs, a filing cabinet with a broken lock, a window looking out onto a concrete wall. I placed the clear plastic sleeve with the burned letter fragment on the desk between us. Whitmore looked at it. His jaw moved slightly. He had recognized the handwritings. She wrote to you, I said. I never received it, he said immediately. I know. It was burned before it was sent. Which means you know what she was going to tell you. Whitmore looked at the burned fragment for a long moment. She called me, he said, once, about 6 weeks before she died. She described the medication she had been given, the coating color. I knew what they were. Who asked you to prepare it? I said. His hands were flat on the desk. He looked at them as if considering whether they belonged to him. The woman, he said. Claudia. She came 3 times. The 3rd time she paid and took delivery. $4,000 in cash. I want you to write that down, I said. Everything. Date, times, what was said, what was exchanged, full names, written and signed. If I do that, if you do that, I said, you become a witness. If you don't, you become an accessory. I leaned forward slightly. You have about 10 minutes to decide which one you'd rather be. Whitmore reached into his desk drawer and took out a legal pad. Whitmore wrote for 22 minutes. I sat across from him and watched the legal pad fill. I did not rush him. I did not speak. Throughout the entire 22 minutes, Whitmore did not look up from the page, not once. When he finished, he set the pen down and pushed the legal pad across the desk. I read it in full, twice. The statement was detailed. 3 visits, September, October, November, $4,000 in cash, a pharmacy bag sealed, labeled with a fictitious patient name, and then, near the middle of the statement, one word crossed out. Shame. He had written it and then deleted it. A man who writes the word shame and then crosses it out is a man who understands what he has done, but is not yet ready to own it in writing. And then, at the end, I did not ask what she intended to do with the compound. 7 words. 7 words of the most deliberate ignorance I had encountered in 31 years. I set the legal pad back on the desk. Sign it, I said. Whitmore signed it. I took the pad, tore the signed pages carefully along the perforation, folded them once, and placed them in my jacket pocket. You'll be contacted, I said. When the time comes, you'll repeat this to a detective and in a courtroom. If you leave Memphis between now and then, that becomes a problem for you. Whitmore nodded. He was looking at the desk again. 1 more question, I said. I waited until he looked up. The first time in 22 minutes. Did Maggie know it was you specifically who made it? Whitmore held my gaze for 2 seconds. She knew it was someone like me, he said. She was a very precise woman. I looked at him for 1 moment longer. Then I stood up and walked to the door. We sat in Frank's Silverado before he started the engine. That's enough for an arrest, Frank said. It's enough for a warrant, I said. Not enough for a conviction. Claudia's lawyer will argue Whitmore is a disgraced practitioner with motive to deflect blame. We need corroboration. The USB files, the pharmacy footage, the pill comparison photographs, all of it together, I said. Each piece alone is contestable. Together they build a structure. I looked out the windshield at the concrete wall of the building across the lot. I need to talk to Solomon Gold. Frank nodded. He started the engine. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. No name saved. 4 words. They know about Lily. I stared at the screen. I called Lily from the car. 3 rings. 4. She picked up on the 5th. Are you still in the house? I asked. Yes. Don't open the door to anyone. I'll be there in 15 minutes. I ended the call and looked at the text again. Somewhere in the network of people connected to this story, someone was on my side who hadn't announced themselves yet. I put the phone in my pocket and watched the city move past the window and thought about all the pieces Maggie had put in place before she died and wondered how many of them I still hadn't found. The house was undisturbed. I checked every room before I said a word to Lily. Lily was in the kitchen. She had made coffee. Not from habit, I suspected, but because making coffee was something to do with your hands when you were frightened and trying not to show it. Oh, thank you for staying, I said. She wrapped both hands around her mug. I placed Lily's white envelope on the table between us. I haven't opened this, I said. It came from Maggie through you. I think you should be here when I read it. I opened the envelope. 1 page, single-sided. Lily, I'm writing this to you separately from the letter I wrote Art, because what I need to ask you is different from what I need to ask him. He is going to want to protect you. That's what he does. It's the first thing he reaches for when someone he loves is in danger. You'll need to let him, up to a point. But you are also a Mercer, whether you've been called that or not. And there is a stubbornness in this family that I have spent 31 years learning to work with rather than against. I think you have it too. What I'm asking you to do is stay, not forever, just long enough for Art to know he isn't alone in this. Your grandfather is 74 years old and has just buried his wife and is about to walk into the hardest month of his life. And I am not able to be there for that. You don't have to forgive Derek. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to stay. With love, Margaret. I finished reading. I folded the letter. I set it on the table. She called me your grandfather, Lily said finally. You are my granddaughter, I said. It was the first time I had said it. The word felt exact, the way the right word always did. Lily looked up at me. She didn't cry, which I respected, because I wasn't going to either. And it was better for both of us to have that established early. All right, she said. I'll stay. My phone rang at 2:15. Mr. Mercer. A man's voice. Older. Deliberate. My name is Solomon Gold. I believe Maggie told you I might call. She did, I said. I have documents in my possession that were prepared by your wife over the course of the last year. A trust restructuring, a revised will, and a recording. I went still. What kind of recording? The kind that explains several things at once. Solomon said, I would prefer to play it for you in person. Art looked across the kitchen table at Lily and Frank. We'll be there at 6, I said. I ended the call and looked at my hands for a moment, and Maggie had been thorough. More thorough than I had known. More thorough than I had deserved. She had built this case the way she had built everything in our 31 years, quietly, precisely, and entirely without my help. I thought about what that said about her. I thought about what it said about me. Then I stood up, put on my jacket, and told Frank and Lily it was time to move. Solomon Gold's office was on the 4th floor of a building that had been on Poplar Avenue since 1962 and showed it, not in disrepair, but in the particular dignity of a structure that had outlasted several versions of the city around it. The elevator was slow. The hallway carpet was dark green, worn in the center where 20 years of footsteps had passed. A small brass nameplate beside the door read Gold and Associates. Attorneys at law. I had been here 3 times in 22 years. Once when Maggie and I bought the house, once when my mother died, once when Maggie updated her will. 4 years ago, she had come out looking lighter, the way people look when they have finally put something in order. I understood now what she had been ordering. Solomon Gold was 71, with the compact, unhurried presence of a man who had been the most prepared person in every room he had entered for 40 years. He shook my hand, nodded at Frank, and looked at Lily with an expression that suggested he was not surprised by her. Maggie told me about you, he said to Lily. She told me about you too, Lily said. Solomon almost smiled. He gestured to the chairs and waited until all 3 of us were seated before he opened the folder. I'll give you the documents in a moment, he said. But Maggie specifically asked me to play the recording first. She said, he checked a handwritten note. She said, Art needs to hear it before he reads anything, because his eyes move faster than his ears, and he'll miss the tone. Something moved through my chest. It was the most Maggie thing she had ever said about me in 31 years. Play it, I said. Solomon pressed a button on the small digital recorder. There was a moment of ambient sound. A room. A chair shifting. The faint mechanical click of a recording device. And then Maggie's voice. Not the frightened voice from the USB files. Not the controlled voice of someone managing a crisis. Her Sunday morning voice. This is Margaret Louise Mercer. Today is January 14th. Solomon, if Art is listening to this, please make sure he has coffee. He makes bad decisions without coffee. A pause. I heard Frank exhale quietly beside me. Art, I need to tell you something I couldn't put in the letter. Because letters can be found, and recordings can be hidden in places letters can't fit. I've been living with this for 4 months. I want you to understand that I was not afraid for myself. I was afraid that if I told you before I had everything in place, you would move too fast, and they would find a way to make you the problem instead of them. I know how you move when you're angry. I've watched you move that way for 31 years, and I love that about you. But I needed you to be still a little longer. By the time you hear this, Solomon will have the trust documents. The trust holds $2.8 million, our savings, the investment accounts, the money I put aside over 14 years from the household budget, because I always believed in keeping a reserve you didn't talk about. That money does not go to Derek or Claudia under any circumstances. Solomon knows who it goes to. But here is what I need you to hear before you read any of that. In November, 3 months ago, Derek came to me alone. Without Claudia. He came in the afternoon while you were at the hardware store, and he sat in the kitchen. And he told me he knew I had seen Claudia at the strip mall. He told me I should sign the power of attorney and let it be simple. He said, a pause, 4 seconds of ambient sound. He said, Mom, don't make this harder than it has to be. The room was silent. I told him I would think about it. He left, and I sat at that kitchen table for a long time. Art. I sat where we've had 31 years of coffee and Sunday mornings, and I thought about the boy I raised, and I thought about the man sitting across from me, and I tried to find the distance between those two things. I couldn't find it. That's what I want you to know. But I also want you to know something else. He is still your son. What he did is not the whole of what he is. I don't know what made him this way, and I don't have time left to find out. But I need you to carry that, the not knowing, because it's the only thing that will keep you human through what's coming. Take care of Lily. She has your stubbornness and my patience, which means she'll be all right. Come back from it, Art. That's all I've ever asked. Well, I love you. I'll love you from wherever this goes. The recording ended. The room held silence for a long moment. Solomon reached over and turned the recorder off. I was looking at the conference table. I breathed. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. Then I looked up at Solomon. Show me the documents, I said. The trust documents were 47 pages. The total, $2,840,000. I had known Maggie was careful with money. I had not known careful had compounded over 31 years into this. The trust has 2 primary beneficiaries, Solomon said. 40% to the Margaret Louise Mercer Community Foundation, a nonprofit she filed the paperwork for last December. Its stated purpose is literacy and workforce development programs in the Memphis metro area. He slid a second page. 60% to Lily Mercer. Lily looked at the page. She didn't speak. She changed it from the original distribution? I asked. The original named you as sole beneficiary. She changed it 7 weeks ago. She left a note. Solomon found it. A single index card, clipped to the back. He read it aloud. Art has his pension, and the house, and 31 years of knowing I loved him. That's enough. Lily has none of those things yet. I looked at that index card for a long moment. She's right, I said. Lily finally looked up. I didn't know any of this. She knew you didn't know, Solomon said. She said that was the point. My phone buzzed on the conference table. Derek. I looked at the screen for 2 full seconds. Then I answered it and put it on speaker. Dad. Derek's voice had the quality of someone who had spent the afternoon deciding how to sound. I wanted to apologize for this morning. All right, I said. A pause. I want to come by tonight. Just me, not Claudia. I think we need to talk. I agree, I said. Say 9 o'clock? I looked at Frank. Frank held up 2 fingers. 9 o'clock, I said. Come alone. I ended the call. Solomon signed the documents with me. 2 pages. Co-trustee confirmation. and authorization for Solomon to contact Detective Briggs with the complete evidentiary package. The signatures took 30 seconds. Then Solomon reached into the folder and produced one final item, a small padded envelope, sealed, with my name in Maggie's handwriting. She said to give you this after you signed, not before. I took it. I held it without opening it. She had a system, I said. She always had a system, Solomon said. And for the first time there was something in his voice that was not professional. The grief of a person who had helped someone build something, knowing they would not live to see it used. I drove home the long way, down Beale Street, past the Anchor with a light on in the window. I thought about a young woman who had worked morning shifts for 7 years and had her grandfather's eyes. I had 45 minutes before Derek arrived. I used them to sit in the driveway and breathe, and to feel the padded envelope in my jacket pocket, and to decide what kind of man I was going to be in the next 2 hours. So I decided that was enough. I went inside. Derek arrived at 8:57, 3 minutes early. He had always been early when he was nervous. I opened the door before he knocked. He was alone. He looked tired in the bone, the way people look when they have been holding something heavy for too long. Come in, I said. We sat in the living room. On the coffee table between us, the power of attorney form, folded open to the signature line. I know what you did. Derek saw it. He looked at it for a long moment, and then looked at his hands. How long have you known? Derek asked. Oh, I'm still finding out how much I know, I said. That's the honest answer. He turned his wedding ring once on his finger. It was her idea, Derek said. At the beginning, the POA. That was Claudia's idea. I went along with it because it seemed... He stopped. Started again. It seemed like the kind of thing that made sense. The medication, I said. That was not what I wanted. I need you to know that. What did you want, Derek? Derek looked up. His eyes were the same river-dark eyes I had looked at for 42 years. Tired, guilty, still my son's. I wanted the money, he said, simply, without theater. I owe people, real people, not creditors, the kind you can't negotiate with. I thought if we had control of the accounts, just control, I thought we could fix it without anyone getting hurt. But Claudia made a different decision, I said. She made arrangements I didn't know about until after they were made. By then... He looked at his hands again. By then, I didn't know how to undo what was already in motion. I looked at my son. I thought about what Maggie had said on the recording. He is still your son. What he did is not the whole of what he is. I thought about the 7-year-old boy who walked back to the house with a split knee and held the screen door open for his mother. There's a recording, I said. From November. Derek alone in this kitchen telling Maggie not to make it harder than it had to be. There are photographs, a written statement from Dr. Whitmore, pharmacy footage of Claudia, USB files Maggie built over 4 months. Solomon Gold has copies of everything. He's already been authorized to pass them to Detective Briggs. Derek opened his eyes. Claudia doesn't know that yet, I said. You do. Now. What do you need from me? Derek said. I placed a cooperation agreement on the coffee table. Sign it tonight, I said. Derek picked it up. He read it slowly. His phone buzzed. Don't answer that, I said. Derek looked at the screen. It's Claudia. Don't answer it, I said again. The phone buzzed 3 more times and went to voicemail. Derek set it face down on the couch. He picked up the pen. He signed. I took the agreement back, folded it, and put it in my jacket pocket alongside the padded envelope from Maggie that I still hadn't opened. What happens now? Derek asked. Now you go home. You act normal. You do not warn Claudia. You come in to see Detective Briggs tomorrow morning at 8. Derek stood. At the door, he paused with his hand on the frame without turning around. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said. I looked at my son's back. "I know," I said. Derek left. I sat alone in the living room for a long time after the sound of the car faded. Then I reached into my jacket pocket and took out the padded envelope. I opened it. Inside was a single item, a thumb drive, silver, smaller than the USB on the chain, a piece of tape on one side. On the tape, in Maggie's handwriting, 3 words, File 13, last. Art called Frank at 10:15. Derek signed, "He's in for tomorrow morning." Good. Frank's voice had the quality of a man still awake and working. Briggs confirmed the 8 a.m. He says the Whitmore statement alone is enough for a warrant. We want more than a warrant. We want a case that doesn't fall apart in 6 months. That's why we're doing the account, Frank said. 3 weeks ago, before the funeral, before any of it, Frank had anticipated one move that predictable people always made when they believed an obstacle had been removed. And working with Solomon, he had established a shadow financial setup, a mirrored version of one of Maggie's investment accounts, containing a small but visible balance, accessible in theory through a forged POA document that Claudia had already been provided with that morning when she left the documents at the house. If Claudia attempted to access it, the attempt would be logged, time-stamped, and traceable. She had attempted it at 9:47 p.m. Frank sent the screenshot to my phone. The access log showed Claudia's IP address, initiating a transfer request of $40,000. The transfer had been flagged and frozen automatically. Document fraud, financial fraud, and attempted wire transfer were all time-stamped. Frank said, "I thought about Claudia sitting in Maggie's armchair that morning with the leather portfolio and the brass clasp. Greed leaves fingerprints." Maggie had written in the margin of a case file once. Years ago. I had laughed at the time. "Briggs needs this tonight," I said. "Already sent. He's filing the warrant at 7 a.m. The arrest will be at the house before Derek arrives at the precinct." I went upstairs to the guest room. Lily was awake, sitting on the edge of the bed. "It's happening tomorrow," I said. She nodded. "Did Derek sign?" she asked. "Yes." She looked out the window for a moment. "Do you think he'll follow through?" I leaned against the doorframe. I thought about Derek 3 minutes early on the front porch. I thought about, "I'm sorry." Dad, and the hand on the frame, and the back that didn't turn around. "I think he's made the only decision that has any future in it," I said. "Whether he follows through depends on whether he's the man he was before he wasn't. I don't know the answer to that yet." Lily looked at me. Maggie thought he could be. Maggie thought a lot of things I'm still catching up to, I said. The almost smile was at the corner of her mouth. "Get some sleep," I said. "You too," she said. I went back downstairs. The silver thumb drive was in front of me on the kitchen table. File 13. Last. I opened the laptop. I plugged in the drive. 1 file. Audio. No label. I hovered the cursor over it. Then I moved the laptop to the side. I looked at the kitchen table instead. The grain of the wood. The small ring from 31 years of coffee cups in the same spot. The faint scratch near the edge where I had put down my service weapon too carelessly one afternoon in 1994, and Maggie had said Arthur James Mercer in a tone that had made me apologize to the table. Tomorrow, after the warrant, after the arrest, after everything Maggie had built became official and permanent. Then I would hear it. I closed the laptop. I turned off the kitchen light. I sat in the dark for exactly the amount of time I needed. Then I went to bed. I woke at 5:47. 4 hours. I lay in the gray pre-dawn light and listened to the house. The guest room quiet. The street quiet. A bird somewhere in the oak tree at the back of the yard, making the same four-note pattern it had been making every morning for as long as I could remember. A small, reliable constant in an unreliable week. I got up. I shaved. I showered. I stood in front of the closet for longer than usual. Maggie had always said that the way you dressed for a consequential day was itself a kind of decision. I reached past the everyday shirts and found what I was looking for. The dark navy suit, bought for my retirement ceremony in 2018. Worn twice since, once for a colleague's funeral, once for a dinner at Solomon's when Maggie had insisted I look like the man she had married. In the back of the closet, on the small hook where Maggie had put it the last time she pressed it, a dark burgundy tie. She had given it to me for our 29th anniversary. She had said the color was called oxblood, and that it looked like someone who had decided something. I put it on. I looked in the mirror, 74 years old, river-dark eyes, the face of a man who had decided something. I went downstairs and made coffee. Lily came down at 7:15. She looked at the suit and the tie without saying anything, which was its own kind of acknowledgement. Frank called, I said. The warrant was signed at 6:58. They're at the house now. What does that feel like? She asked. I considered the question. Like the end of a long drive, I said. When you pull into the destination and you're not sure yet whether to get out of the car, are you going to get out of the car? Already out, I said. Frank called at 7:44. She's in custody. Went without incident. A pause. She asked if you had signed the POA. I set down my coffee cup. What did Briggs tell her? He told her Mr. Mercer had responded to the document, Frank said. There was something in his voice that lived in the neighborhood of satisfaction. I thought about I know what you did on the signature line. Derek? I asked. Arrived at the precinct at 7:58, Frank said. 2 minutes early. I went to the precinct at 9. Detective Briggs was mid-40s, compact, with the quiet efficiency of a person who had been doing serious work long enough to stop performing the seriousness of it. Your wife was thorough, Briggs said. She was, I said. The Whitmore statement, the USB files, the pharmacy footage, the account access log. We have a full evidentiary chain. The DA's office reviewed it this morning. They're moving forward. Derek's statement added the timeline detail we needed for premeditation. The medication switch was planned no later than October. I nodded. Do you want to know where Derek is right now? Briggs asked. I thought about it. No, I said. Not today. I was almost at the door when Briggs spoke again. Mr. Mercer. I turned. She must have been something, he said. Your wife. To have put all of this together the way she did. I stood in the doorway, in the navy suit and the oxblood tie, and thought about 31 years of kitchen tables and coffee rings and the four-note bird in the oak tree and the blue sky color of an envelope sewn into the lining of a coat. She was everything, I said. I walked out into the Memphis morning. I drove home slowly. Not the long way, just slowly. The way you move when the urgency has resolved itself, and what remains is the space that urgency had been filling. I parked in the driveway. I sat for a moment. I thought about the charges: attempted financial fraud, document fraud, wire transfer fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, first-degree murder. The word premeditated attached now, formally, to a decision someone had made in the fall and carried through into winter and into the spring morning when Maggie had her cardiac arrest on the kitchen floor while I was in the garage changing the oil on the car. I had been 40 feet away. I allowed myself to feel that for exactly as long as I needed to. Then I got out of the car. The house was quiet. Lily had left a note. Went to the Anchor, back by noon. Coffee in the pot. She had drawn a small arrow pointing to the coffee maker. I poured a cup. I sat at the kitchen table. I looked at the silver thumb drive. I opened the laptop. I plugged in the drive. One file. Audio. No label. I double-clicked. The ambient sound was different from the recording at Solomon's office. This one had been made somewhere with more air, outdoors, or near an open window. I could hear birds in the background. Specifically, 4 notes. Repeating. The oak tree. She had recorded this in our backyard. Art. Her voice was different from the one on the recorder at Solomon's. Not frightened. Not managing anything. Just her voice. The version of it that existed only in private. Only in the moments between the public and the essential. I want to tell you something I could never quite manage to say out loud, because every time I tried it came out wrong, too formal, or too small for what I meant. 31 years ago, you sat across from me at a table that wasn't ours yet, in a city we were still learning. And you told me that the most honest thing you could offer me was not certainty, but attention. You said you couldn't promise you'd always know what to do, but you could promise you would always be paying attention to what mattered. I've been thinking about that for 31 years. You kept that promise. Every single day. The way you made coffee at 6 in the morning before I was awake because you knew I would want it ready. The way you always let me have the left side of the bed, even though I know you preferred it. The way you held the door and learned the neighbors' names and remembered what people told you about their lives even years later. I know I kept this from you. I know that's going to sit with you for a long time. I watched you work cases for 31 years. What you were never good at was not taking it personally. And this, art. This was the most personal thing there has ever been. If I had told you in October, I think you would have walked into that conversation with Derek and said something that could not be unsaid. And they would have used it. So I waited, and I built it. And I left it where you could find it. I'm not afraid. I want you to hear me say that in my own voice, not in writing. I am not afraid. I made my choices. I did what I could with the time I had. I'm proud of it. What I want from you now is simple. Do the work. Let the people you've found help you. Let Lily in. She needs someone to be her grandfather. And I think you need someone to be her grandfather too. And when it's done, come back. There is a garden in the back of this house that I've been planning since 2019. The plans are in the drawer in the garden shed, the blue folder, sunflowers along the south wall, lavender at the border. Because I know you've always said you don't like lavender. And I've never believed you. Plant the garden, art. That's the last thing I'm going to ask you to do. I love you. I have loved you for 31 years with everything I had. And if there is anything after this, I will love you from there too. Goodbye, baby. The recording ended. I sat at the kitchen table in the navy suit and the oxblood tie. I sat for a long time. Outside, the 4-note bird in the oak tree kept going. The same patient pattern it had been repeating every morning for as long as I could remember. Indifferent to grief and consequence and the slow work of justice. Just a bird making the same sound in the same tree. Because that was its nature. And the morning was there, and it had not been asked to stop. I pressed both palms flat on the table. I breathed. I was still here. Lily came back at 11:53, 7 minutes early. I noted it and filed it beside Derek, arriving 3 minutes early the night before. And wondered if earliness was a Mercer trait I had never noticed, because I had always been the one setting the schedule. She was carrying a paper bag from the Anchor, 2 cups of coffee and a slice of lemon pound cake wrapped in wax paper. I didn't know if you'd eaten, she said. I hadn't, I said. I poured the coffee into proper cups. Maggie had always said paper cups were for commutes, not conversations, and set the lemon cake on a plate in the center of the table. I want to show you something, I said. I brought the blue folder from the garden shed. It was exactly where Maggie had said, in the drawer on the left side of the potting table, beneath a seed catalog and a pair of gardening gloves worn to the shape of her hands. I stood in the garden shed for a full minute, holding those gloves. Then I put them back exactly where they were. The blue folder contained 4 pages, a hand-drawn sketch of the back garden, south wall marked clearly, with measurements in Maggie's neat hand, a list of plant varieties organized by bloom season, a page of notes about the lavender border. Art will say he doesn't like it. He does. Plant it anyway. And a final page that was simply a list of things she had wanted the garden to become. A place to sit in the morning when it's too early for anyone to be talking. A place for the bird to have something to land on that isn't just a branch. A place for Lily to know she belongs here. A place for Art to come back to. I set the folder on the table between us. Lily read it slowly. She read the lavender note twice. When she got to the last page, she was quiet for a long moment. She planned all of this, Lily said. Oh, she planned everything, I said. I'm still finding out how much. Have you ever gardened? Lily asked. No, I said. Have you? A little. I had a fire escape in my last apartment. I grew tomatoes. I looked at her. Fire escape tomatoes, I said. They were good tomatoes, she said. I almost laughed. It surprised me. The way it came up from somewhere I hadn't expected. Something small and real, and not at all proportionate to the gravity of the week. And yet, exactly proportionate to this moment. This table. This girl with my eyes eating lemon cake in my kitchen. I let it settle. We'll start in the spring, I said. Sunflowers first. Lily looked at me. The almost smile was at the corner of her mouth. She said you'd try to delay the lavender. She did not write that. She kind of wrote that. I looked at the 3rd page again. Art will say he doesn't like it. He does. Plant it anyway. Fine, I said. We ate the lemon cake. We drank the coffee from proper cups, outside the kitchen window. The back garden was exactly as it had always been. The empty south wall, the oak tree, Memphis in mid-afternoon with the kind of light that made everything look like it had been there a long time and intended to stay. Keep showing up, I said. That's all. She nodded. I picked up my phone and went to call Frank. 3 months passed, the way serious time passes. Not quickly, not slowly, but with the particular weight of a period that is building towards something without rushing. I gave my formal statement to Detective Briggs on a Thursday morning, 10 days after Claudia's arrest. The statement took 3 hours and 14 minutes. When it was done, I walked out through the precinct and down the front steps into a Memphis morning. I sat on the steps for a moment. I had not planned to sit on the steps. I just did. Frank found me there 10 minutes later. How was it? He asked. Like emptying a room, I said. Everything you thought would be hard to say wasn't. And one thing you hadn't thought about nearly was... Frank waited. He asked me to describe my relationship with my son, I said. Routine question. I sat there for maybe 15 seconds, and I couldn't find the answer. Not because it was complicated, because it was both the simplest and the most broken thing I know. And I didn't have the words for both of those at the same time. What did you say? Frank asked. I said he was my son, and that he always would be. Briggs had one final question before he closed the session. The USB your wife prepared. There are 12 files. We've verified 11. File 12 contains approximately 4 minutes of audio with no voice, no narration, just ambient sound. He slid a printed transcript across the table. Our forensic team believes your wife made it the night Derek came to her alone in October. She left the recorder running after he left. I looked at the transcript. 4 minutes of an empty kitchen after my son had asked his mother not to make things harder than they had to be. 4 minutes of Maggie. Sitting alone with what she now knew. She recorded everything, I said. Everything she could, Briggs said. I thought about that for the rest of the day. The preliminary hearing was in February. Lily came and sat in the gallery without being asked, wearing the green jacket and the composed expression of someone determined to be present. Claudia was convicted on all counts: murder in the first degree, conspiracy, financial fraud, document fraud. I visited Derek once, not at the precinct, not at a courthouse, at a facility in Shelby County. In a visiting room with flat light and clean surfaces, we talked for 40 minutes. Not about the case. We talked about a camping trip in 1989. Derek was 9, and the tent had collapsed in the middle of the night. And Maggie had refused to find it funny until morning, when she had laughed until she cried at the breakfast fire. We talked about a dog they had for 6 years named simply Dog, because Derek at 7 had decided that naming a dog anything other than what it was constituted a form of dishonesty. When the visit was over, Derek stood. "Tell Lily," he started. He stopped. "Tell her yourself," I said. "When you're ready, she'll be there." 40 years of words. I thought on the drive home, and the most important conversation I'd had with my son in a decade had been about a collapsed tent and a dog named Dog. Maggie would have had something to say about that. I could almost hear it. I went inside. The Margaret Louise Mercer Community Foundation opened on a Saturday in April, 14 months after Maggie's death. Lily had suggested the timing. Not the anniversary of the death. The anniversary of the month Maggie had always said was the best month in Memphis. When everything that had survived the winter was finally willing to admit it. The foundation's inaugural program was a literacy initiative serving 6 Memphis area schools. By the time the doors opened, it had already enrolled 214 children. Art stood near the door and watched people arrive. Frank, in an actual tie. Mrs. Holden from next door, in her good coat. Detective Briggs in civilian clothes, who shook my hand and said nothing beyond the handshake, which was exactly right. Doctor. Whitmore had sent a letter, not in person, which I understood. A letter that said what it needed to say and asked for nothing in return. Lily had organized a corner of the room with beanbag chairs and picture books she had purchased herself from a bookshop on Beale Street. She was sitting on the floor with 3 children, who could not have been older than 7, holding a book open between them, reading with an animation that was entirely natural and not at all performed. One of them had put a hand on her knee without noticing he had done it. Maggie would have seen that and known what it meant before I had finished forming the thought. I turned toward the display board. I found the photograph I wanted, taken at the kitchen table, a Sunday morning, the east window light making everything look painted rather than built. Maggie was reading. Her coffee cup was in her left hand. Her reading glasses were on. She was not doing anything significant. She was just there, fully. The way she was always fully there. I looked at that photograph for a long time. Then I straightened my tie and went to find Frank, because there were people to talk to and a foundation to celebrate, and a Saturday in April in Memphis that Maggie had always said was the best month in the city. And she had never once been wrong about that. He went to see Derek one more time, 3 weeks after the foundation opening, on a Tuesday morning when Memphis was finally doing what it had been threatening to do since March. Derek was in the same visiting room. He looked better than the last time. Not better in the sense of resolved, but better in the sense of a man who had begun to locate himself inside a new set of facts. I set a photograph on the table between us. It was from the foundation opening. Lily in the beanbag chair corner, the 3 children leaning in, the child with his hand on her knee without noticing. Derek looked at it for a long time. "She looks like her mother," he said. "She looks like us," I said. Derek picked up the photograph carefully. The foundation. Lily told me about it in a letter. She's been writing. He paused. I didn't expect that. She's a Mercer, I said. We do things we don't expect. Something moved across Derek's face. The approximation of a smile. The almost smile. The corner of the mouth. The same place in the same face where I had found my own version for 74 years. Dad, he said, I keep thinking about something Mom said. She said, Derek, I have loved you every single day since I met you. That's not going to change based on what you do next. But what you do next is still going to happen, and you're going to have to carry it. Make sure it's something you can carry. He set the photograph back down. I didn't listen. She was right, I said. You're going to carry it, but carrying something doesn't mean it carries you. I paused. There's a difference. Derek looked up. I know, he said. And for the first time since this had all started, I believed that he did. We talked for an hour. About the camping trip outside Nashville in 1989. About the tent. About Maggie laughing until she cried at the breakfast fire. About the dog named Dog. Derek laughed at the dog named Dog. Not a polite laugh, a real one. I listened to that laugh. I filed it next to the almost smile, and the 2 minutes early, and the I know that I believed this time. When the visit ended, Derek stood. Is the foundation going well? He asked. Yes, I said. Good, Derek said, simply. The word was just the word. I drove home on the river road, the one that ran along the bluffs above the Mississippi and gave you the view of the water that Memphis had been built around. The river was doing what it always did, wide, brown, patient, carrying everything that was put into it toward a place it was going, regardless of what was asked of it. I thought about what it meant to move without urgency and still arrive. I went home and looked at the south wall of the garden and thought about sunflowers. They planted the sunflowers on a Saturday in early May. Lily arrived at 8 in the morning with 2 bags from the garden center and a printed page of instructions she had annotated in the margins. Mammoth Russian, she said, holding up a packet of seeds. 6 to 12 feet tall, full sun, south wall is perfect. She specified sunflowers, I said. She didn't specify Mammoth Russian. She would have, Lily said. Trust me. I looked at her. All right, I said. We worked from 8 until noon. I had never gardened in 31 years of living in this house. I found, to my mild surprise, that I was not bad at it. Lily showed me the spacing, 18 inches between seeds, the south wall providing the windbreak the plants would need in July. She showed me the depth, an inch, no more. The seeds resting in the dark, just below the surface where the warmth could find them. I planted 12 seeds along the south wall. Lily planted 12 more, 24 sunflowers. When we finished, we sat on the back step with glasses of water and looked at the south wall, which now had 24 small mounds of turned earth at its base. Maggie's birthday is in 3 weeks, Lily said. You know that, I said. She told me. She said she had always wanted someone to plant something on it rather than bring flowers to a cemetery. Lily looked at the south wall. We're a little early, but she probably planned for that. I looked at the 24 small mounds of turned earth. She did, I said. She definitely planned for that. I went to the cemetery on the 20th. I went alone. I sat on the bench near her grave and told her everything. The foundation. The children in the beanbag chairs. Lily reading on the floor. Derek's laugh at the dog named Dog. The sunflowers. I sat for a while longer. The cemetery was quiet. A groundskeeper moved in the distance. A family arrived near the far section. Standing together, looking at a stone they clearly knew by heart. The light was the particular May light that Memphis produced. Warm, but not heavy yet. The kind that belonged to the weeks before summer decided to be fully serious about itself. I thought about what she had said at the end of File 13. If there is anything after this, I will love you from there too. I don't know what I believed about that, theologically speaking. but sitting in the May light, with the sense of her that had not diminished in the 14 months since she died. In the planned things, in the four-note bird, and the lavender note, and the child's hand on Lily's knee. I thought that whatever I believed or didn't believe, something of Maggie was still here, patient as a garden, moving without urgency. I stood. I went home and watered the sunflower seeds and ate lunch with Lily, who had made sandwiches and had, I noticed, put a small vase of lavender on the kitchen windowsill. I did not comment on the lavender. I ate my sandwich. I drove to the river on a Sunday morning in June. Lily was at the anchor. Frank was visiting his daughter in Nashville. The house was quiet, not empty, not absent, just composed. Ja, pension. I parked at the overlook on the bluffs and sat on a bench that had been there for 20 years. The Mississippi was doing what it always did, brown and wide, and carrying everything put into it toward a horizon that was technically knowable and practically beyond reckoning. I had always found the river clarifying in a way I had never quite been able to articulate. Maggie had found it gloomy until about 2003, and beautiful after that, which she had attributed to perspective, and I had attributed to 40 years of accumulated evidence that beautiful things sometimes required time to become visible. I sat on the bench and watched the water. I thought about forgiveness, not abstractly. I thought about it the way I thought about everything, in terms of what it was and what it required and what it cost, and whether the cost was proportionate to what you got in return. I did not know yet if I could forgive Derek. That was the honest answer. I knew I loved my son. I understood that love and forgiveness were not the same thing, and that conflating them made both worse. But I also knew this. Maggie had asked me to carry the not knowing, and I had been carrying it. And the not knowing about Derek, not knowing what made him this way, not knowing where the man I raised had diverged from the man sitting across from me in the flat institutional light, was the specific weight that made forgiveness a live question rather than a closed one. Live questions, in my experience, resolved over time, not cleanly, not completely, but in the way the river resolved everything, gradually, with patience, taking the long way. I thought about Claudia. I had not visited her. I did not intend to. The law had handled what the law was for. I wished her the thing. I wished every person who chose harm over other available options the specific, difficult understanding that comes after. The weight of it. The years of carrying what you chose, not as punishment, as the natural consequence of decisions made in full knowledge of what they were. I had said that to Briggs once, over coffee after a deposition. Briggs had looked at me and said, "You're not what I expected from this case." I had said, "Neither was my wife." I thought about Maggie. Not with the initial grief that felt like amputation, not with the raw, immediate loss, but with the settled grief of a man who has learned to live with an absence that is also, in a specific and non-mystical way, a presence. She was in the garden plan in the blue folder. She was in the foundation. She was in the letters she had written Lily. She was in the recording from the backyard with the four-note bird. She was in Lily's patience and her own stubbornness, combined exactly as advertised, Omar. I thought about what it meant to love someone so thoroughly that even your death becomes an act of care. I had no category for that in any formal framework I had ever used. I just knew what it felt like from the receiving end, and what it felt like was like being held. Not held back, just held. I sat on the bench for 40 minutes. When I stood with the deliberateness of a man who is going somewhere, rather than leaving somewhere. I looked at the river for one more moment. I thought about File 13. Come back from it. Art. That's all I've ever asked. I was back. Not the same as before. That was not how coming back worked. Not at 74. Not after this. But back in the sense she had meant present, functional, moving forward, paying attention to what mattered. Still here. I walked back to the car. I drove home down Creston. I parked in the garage this time. Maggie had been right. Memphis nights had a way of reaching into unlocked cars. The south wall of the garden had produced 8 inches of progress. The mammoth Russians were taking their time, which was their nature, and which I had decided to regard as a feature rather than a drawback. I went inside. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table and looked out the back window at the south wall, and the 8 inches of green determination pushing up toward a summer that was going to give them everything they needed. I thought about what Maggie had written in the garden plan, a place for art to come back to. I had come back. I was here. Summer came to Elm Street the way it always had, heavy and particular, the kind of heat that didn't apologize, that settled into the streets and the rooftops and the skin, and reminded you that this city had been built in a geography that required toughness and rewarded patience. Art had lived in this heat for 50 years. The mammoth Russians grew through July like they had something to prove. By the first week of August, they were 6 feet tall. By the third week, they were 8. The first heads opened on a Tuesday morning when I was in the kitchen making coffee. And I looked out the back window and saw the yellow for the first time. Enormous, facing the morning sun with the particular confidence of a plant that had been going about its business all summer and had arrived, finally, at the thing it was for. I stood at the window for a long time. Then I poured my coffee and called Lily. They're open, I said. I know, she said. I saw them from the driveway when I dropped off the foundation reports yesterday. I didn't say anything because I wanted you to see them first. I looked at the south wall, 8 feet of yellow on the lavender border at the base just coming into its second bloom. The specific combination of colors that Maggie had sketched in the blue folder with colored pencils and described as the only thing I've wanted to look at from that window for 20 years. Come over when you can, I said. I'll be there at noon, she said. I'm bringing sandwiches. I sat at the kitchen table. I had been sitting at this table for 31 years, a number that had meant different things at different times, and that now meant, most precisely, long enough to know what permanence felt like, and long enough to know that permanence was not the same as unchanging. I thought about what I had learned in the past 18 months. I had learned that evidence was not the same as truth, but that carefully assembled evidence was the closest you could get to truth in a system that required proof rather than knowledge. I had learned that a man's capacity for harm and his capacity for love were not in opposition, that they could exist in the same person, in the same face, in the same river-dark eyes. I had learned that grief, handled carefully and not alone, could become something other than weight. It could become direction. I had learned that a woman I had lived with for 31 years had been more prepared for my worst year than I had been capable of preparing myself, that this was not a failure of mine, but a particular expression of her love, the patient, specific love of a person who knew you well enough to plan for your limitations. I had learned that coming back from something was not the same as recovering from it. Recovery implied a return to a prior state. Coming back was different. Arriving at a new one. Carrying what you knew. Wearing what had changed. I took the watch off my wrist. I held it on the table in front of me. The gold case. The white face. The Roman numerals that had kept time through 31 years of ordinary mornings. Through the week that had changed everything. Through 18 months of justice and grief and 8 feet of yellow sunflowers on a south wall. The USB from the watch was on a separate chain now, archived in Solomon's office with the complete evidentiary record. The watch itself was just a watch again, which was what it had always been. Before it was evidence, before it was a map. I turned it over, on the back, where the USB had been taped. The adhesive had left a faint rectangular mark. I ran my thumb across it. I put the watch back on. There was one question I had not asked myself directly. In all the months of preparation and evidence and legal proceedings and grave visits and river mornings, I asked it now. Was it worth it? Not the justice. The justice was not a question. That part was simply necessary. I meant the other thing. The long way through. The decision to give Derek every opportunity. The decision to sit in the visiting room with a photograph and the dog named Dog. The decision to plant sunflowers on a south wall and learn the spacing from a woman who had grown tomatoes on a fire escape. The decision to come back rather than simply endure. Was it worth it? I looked out the window at 8 feet of yellow facing the sun. I thought about Lily at noon with sandwiches. I thought about Maggie's voice from the backyard. The 4-note bird. I will love you from wherever this goes. I thought about a boy at 7 holding a screen door open with a split knee and blood on his shin. And a man at 44 making the only decision left with any future in it. And the distance between those two things that I had been carrying all year, his to carry, not carrying him. I thought about 31 years of coffee at 6 in the morning before she was awake, because she would want it ready. Yes, it was worth it. I finished my coffee. I washed the cup. I looked out the window one more time at the mammoth Russians on the south wall, and at the lavender border that I had planted myself with my own hands, and which I was not going to admit, to Lily or to anyone, that I had come to find genuinely beautiful. I put on my jacket. I went out into the Memphis summer. I was still here. I spent 74 years thinking I was the one who protected this family. I was wrong. Maggie was the one protecting us. Quietly, patiently, right up until the end. And I was so busy being the detective, the veteran, the man who had seen everything, that I almost missed every single sign. Don't be like me. If the people closest to you are pushing you to sign things you don't understand, to hand over control you didn't offer, slow down. Ask questions. Call a lawyer you chose yourself, not one they chose for you. God gave you discernment for a reason. Use it before you need it, not after. I learned that grief makes you vulnerable in ways you don't expect. When Maggie died, I wanted to trust Derek because trusting him meant some part of our family was still intact. That desire, the desire to believe the best, is not weakness, but it can be used against you. The people who want what you have will always arrive at your most broken moment. That is not coincidence. That is strategy. Watch for it. God also gave us people, Frank, Solomon, Detective Briggs, even Lily, a granddaughter I didn't know I had, sent to me in the middle of the worst year of my life by a woman who was already gone. None of us were meant to carry these things alone. If you are carrying something alone right now, that is the first thing to change. And the last thing I will tell you is this. Coming back from something is not the same as recovering from it. Recovery means returning to who you were. Coming back means becoming who you are now, with everything you know and everything you've lost, and everything that somehow, by God's grace, remained. The sunflowers are 8 feet tall. The lavender is blooming. I am still here. If this story meant something to you, save it, share it, and leave one word in the comments that tells me where you are right now. Final note. This content contains dramatized storytelling elements for educational purposes. Some details are fictional, but the core lessons about recognizing financial and emotional abuse are real. If this style isn't right for you, that's okay. Please seek out content that better fits your needs.